Rosamund Hale did not flinch when she heard it. That, more than anything else, was what she would remember afterward. Not the words themselves, which rearranged everything she believed about her marriage into something she no longer recognized, but the steadiness of her own hands as she stood in the hallway outside the dining room door, holding the letter from Manchester that had arrived that afternoon. The letter she had been on her way to show her husband. She had been smiling when she left the kitchen. She could feel the particular shape of that smile, still fading, as the words reached her through the gap in the door. "Come now, Hale," Mr. Barnett was saying, in the warm and self-satisfied tone of a man who felt certain of his audience. 7 years married. What's the honest assessment? There was a pause. Thaddeus Hale was not a man who hesitated often. When he did, it meant he was calculating rather than thinking. "Rose is competent," he said finally. "She runs the house. She doesn't complain." A short exhale, almost a laugh. "She's exactly what she was supposed to be." "High praise," Mr. Sloane said dryly, and the table laughed. "I mean it plainly," Thaddeus continued, his voice carrying the ease of a man speaking among friends who expected nothing better than honesty. "If I'd wanted warmth over competence, I might have chosen differently. But I chose well enough for what I needed." Chosen well enough. The letter was still in Rosamund's hand. The paper was thick, good paper. Mr. Hennessy of Hennessy and Birch in Manchester always used good paper. She had noticed that in his very first letter, 8 months ago, and she had matched it in her replies, because she understood without being taught that in business, the quality of your stationery told a man whether to take you seriously before he had read a word. She had spent 8 months taking herself seriously on her husband's behalf, and today Mr. Hennessy had written to confirm that Hale & Sons had secured the contract. £1,200. The largest single order in the mill's history. She had been coming to tell Thaddeus. She had been smiling. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, long enough that the laughter from the dining room subsided and the conversation drifted back to something about railway shares. Then she turned, very quietly, and walked back to the hall table. She set the letter down, face down, not hidden, just placed, with the careful precision she brought to everything. She went upstairs. She did not take much. The wool dress she'd worn when she arrived in Bradford 7 years ago, folded at the back of the wardrobe without her ever being quite able to say why she kept it. Her mother's garnet brooch. The small leather case, where she kept her personal correspondence. Letters from the women in the village, who had learned to read in her Thursday evening classes. From mill children's parents. From 2 former students who had written to say they'd found decent work because of what she'd taught them. She took the money she had saved from the tutoring, £43 accumulated over 7 years in coins, and small notes pressed into her hand by grateful families who insisted they had something to give. She left the household accounts on the study desk, every column in order, every notation legible, 4 years of careful management laid out in her small, precise hand for anyone who cared to look. She left before the port was poured. The morning came the way autumn mornings in Yorkshire always did, low grey light offering nothing in the way of comfort and everything in the way of clarity. Thaddeus Hale came downstairs and found the house running precisely as it always did. Breakfast prepared, fires laid, the dining room sideboard polished. There was no chaos, there was no evidence of departure. There was only the letter, face down on the hall table, waiting. He picked it up and read it twice. "Dear Mr. Hale, it is my pleasure to confirm that Hale & Sons has been selected as primary supplier for our expanded northern contract, valued at £1,200 for the coming year, with strong likelihood of renewal. I extend particular thanks to Mrs. R. Hale, whose correspondence has been exceptionally clear, and whose understanding of supply timelines and grade specifications reflects considerable expertise. Should you wish to proceed, please instruct Mrs. Hale to send the counter-signature at her earliest convenience." He put the letter down. He had not known about any correspondence with Hennessy. He had not known there was a contract being negotiated. He did not know, he realized with a cold and clarifying shock, what his wife had been doing at the small writing desk in the corner of the parlor every evening while he read the newspaper. He went into the study. He had not opened the household accounts ledger in 4 years, because Rosamund managed them and things were managed, and that had been sufficient for his purposes. What he found when he opened it was not what he expected. He had expected ordinary household tallies, coal, wages, provisions. Instead, he found a system, expenditures tracked not only by category but by supplier, with margin notes comparing prices from one quarter to the next, A separate column she called reserve, built from bulk purchase savings and redirected into a discretionary fund. The ledger listed simply as community outreach, which he traced, following the notations, to a church hall in town where she ran Thursday evening, reading classes for mill workers' wives, and Saturday morning arithmetic lessons for their children. She had been running those classes for 3 years. He had not known. He sat at the desk for a long time, then he went to find her. He did not send a servant, he went himself. He asked at every town along the most likely routes, at coaching inns and dry goods stores and post offices, describing her: dark hair, gray eyes, quiet manner, probably carrying a leather correspondence case. He had expected to find no one who recognized her. Instead, he found the opposite, at every stop. At a coaching inn in Cayley, the innkeeper's wife said, "Oh, Mrs. Hale. She stopped here Thursday evening. She sat with my daughter for an hour, helping her draft a letter to the employment agency in Leeds. Wouldn't hear of payment." The woman paused, looking at him steadily. "You're her husband?" "Yes." Another moment of quiet assessment. She said she was heading to Harrogate. In Skipton, a wool merchant told him a woman matching her description had stopped 3 days earlier. He remembered her because she'd noticed a miscalculation in an invoice he was preparing and pointed it out without making a fuss. "Saved me 15 shillings, he said. I tried to thank her. She said it was nothing. At a church porch outside Harrogate, a minister said that a Mrs. Hale had attended Sunday service the previous week and stayed afterward to speak with 2 young women who were struggling with their reading. She'd given the minister her address and told him she was available any morning that week, if anyone needed assistance. Thaddeus had ridden 3 days asking strangers about his wife, and every single one of them knew exactly who she was. He rode into Harrogate on a Tuesday with that knowledge sitting in his chest like a weight he had not agreed to carry and could not put down. The school occupied 3 rooms above a draper's shop on a quiet side street, rented from a Mr. Finch who had been running a charity school in that space for 12 years, and had taken Rosamund on as an additional instructor within 3 days of her arrival. Which told Thaddeus something both about the school's need and about the impression his wife made when she chose to be known. He heard her through the open window before he reached the door. She was teaching arithmetic, long division. The particular tone she used when explaining something she found genuinely interesting, not performed enthusiasm but the real kind, the kind that made a subject feel worth caring about, was a tone he recognized from the early years of their marriage and had not, he understood now, heard in some time. A child's voice cut through. "Why do we need to know this, if we're going to work in the mill anyway?" A pause. Then Rosamund said evenly, "Because the man who owns the mill needs someone who can count his money accurately, and I'd rather that someone be you than someone who didn't bother to learn." The room laughed. Thaddeus stepped back from the window. He had thought, riding here, that seeing her would tell him what to say. Instead, he stood on a cobblestone street in Harrogate and understood that he had no right to any particular words, and that the words he'd been rehearsing, explanations, context, the social machinery of what men said in rooms among friends, were not what was needed. He had been performing for Barnett and Sloane. He knew that. What he hadn't known until he stood outside a charity school 3 days from home was that the performance had cost him something real. He went in anyway, because the alternative was to turn around, and he had done enough of that. 15 children between the ages of 8 and 14 looked up when the door opened with the frank and unified curiosity of children who had decided this space was theirs. Rosamund looked up last. When she saw him, something moved through her face, too fast to catch completely, something that passed through surprise and landed in a stillness he recognized from 7 years of marriage, the face she wore when she was deciding how to respond before she responded. "Continue the problems on the board," she said to the room, without looking away from him. "All 3. Show your work." She walked toward him. He held the door and stepped outside. She came out and pulled it nearly closed behind her, leaving just enough of a gap to hear if anything went wrong inside. They stood in the narrow hallway above the draper's shop. The smell of wool came up through the floorboards. "You look tired," he said. She regarded him with an expression of almost clinical patience. "That's what you've come with." "I'm aware it isn't much." "It isn't anything, Thaddeus." He reached into his coat pocket and held out the letter, the Hennessy letter, which he had brought without quite knowing why, only that it seemed important. "You were bringing this to me that night." She looked at it. She did not take it. "Yes." You were on your way to show me, and you heard. I heard you. Simple, complete, not what you said, not the things you told them. Just I heard you, as if the hearing was the whole thing, and required no further description. There's a bench at the end of the hall, Rosamund said. I have 20 minutes before the next portion of the lesson. They sat. She left the length of an arm between them. You didn't know about the Hennessy contract, she said. It was not a question. No. You didn't know about the Thursday classes. Or the Saturday arithmetic lessons. No. You didn't know I had 43 pounds saved. She looked at her hands in her lap. You didn't know what I thought about on any given Tuesday. He felt those last words land, because they were his own, return precisely. No, I didn't. She was quiet for a moment. The sound of children working came through the gap in the door. Chalk on a board, a muffled consultation. I need you to understand something, she said. Not so that you feel worse. But because I think you came here believing this was a misunderstanding, and it wasn't. You said what you meant. It may not have been the whole truth, but it was the available truth. The version of me that existed in your mind when someone asked you directly. A woman who runs the house and doesn't complain. She looked at him. That version of me was built on everything I actually did, and you had no idea what any of it was. I know that now. I was going to tell you about Hennessy that night, she said, without heat. I had it ordered in my head. Show you the letter, tell you I'd been writing on behalf of the mill for 8 months. Explain that Hennessy wanted the contract specifically because of what I'd communicated about the wool quality and supply timelines. I was going to be straightforward about it and let you decide how you felt. A pause. And then I heard you, and I understood that I had been waiting for a conversation with a man who did not know I existed. He had no answer for that. I'm not looking for an apology, she continued. I want you to understand the thing itself, not apologize around it. You treated our marriage like a well-run property. You were satisfied because things functioned. And I made myself so efficient that there was nothing left to notice. I thought if I did enough, the noticing would follow. She looked at the wall across from them. It didn't. No, it didn't, and that is on me. Downstairs, someone rearranged bolts of fabric. The sounds came up muffled and ordinary, the business of a Wednesday afternoon in October. How did you find me? She asked. He told her, the innkeeper's wife in Keighley, the wool merchant in Skipton, the minister outside Harrogate. He watched her face as he listed them. Something shifted in it, not softening but a recognition. The particular look of a person who has done things without an audience, and is surprised to learn there was one after all. They're kind people, she said. They're people who know who you are. He held her gaze, which I apparently didn't. A boy appeared in the doorway, 10 years old, with the posture of someone who had decided he owned any room he stood in, and the expression of a child, processing an adult situation he had not been invited into. Mrs. Hale. Not looking away from Thaddeus. Ada's stuck on the second problem and she says she's not stuck but she is. Pip, Rosamund's voice was calm. Give me a moment. The boy, Pip, turned his full assessment on Thaddeus. It was the frank and unnerving scrutiny of a child who had not yet learned the social usefulness of tact. You're the husband. I am. Mr. Finch said someone might come. Pip folded his arms. He said to let him know if anyone showed up causing trouble. I'm not here to cause trouble. That's what trouble says. He glanced back at Rosamund. Ada's going to give up and pretend she understood it. She does that. I'll be right in. Rosamund looked at Thaddeus. There's a tea shop on the corner. Give me until 2:30. He waited at the tea shop. He ordered tea he didn't drink and sat for 40 minutes, thinking about a ledger full of notations in his wife's handwriting, and 8 months of correspondence with a Manchester buyer who referred to her by name as though she were the head of the firm. At 2:30, she came in and sat across from him. She looked at the untouched cup with the expression of a woman taking inventory. You should have eaten, she said. I wasn't hungry. You rode 3 days. She signaled the proprietor without ceremony. When the woman came, Rosamund ordered bread and a fresh pot and said thank you in the specific way she said thank you to people doing their jobs. Like she meant it, like she'd actually seen the person and not just the service. Thaddeus watched her do it, and felt the precise dimensions of everything he had never once paid attention to. Tell me what you want, he said, when the proprietor had gone. Not what seems possible, not what you think I'm prepared to hear, what you want. Rosamund looked out the window. The October light was thin and honest, without flattery. I want to finish the term here, she said. Pip is 10 weeks from sitting the examination that qualifies him for the technical school in Leeds. I will not leave before that's done. All right. I want the Thursday reading classes to continue when I come back. Not in a church hall. In a proper room with proper light, paid for by the mill, because those are your workers' families, and their education is your business as much as it is mine. Yes. She turned and looked at him directly. I want to know what happens at the mill, not as a courtesy, as a matter of course. I want to be consulted when contracts are being pursued. I want the correspondence to run through me as well as through you. She held his gaze. I secured Hennessy. I can secure others. And I want you to say that plainly in whatever room we are standing in. Not manage it quietly and leave me to infer. I'll do all of it, he said. She watched him with the expression of a woman who had learned not to accept the first surface of a thing. There is one more thing, she said. Name it. That night at dinner. She laced her fingers together on the table. You gave Barnett and Sloane the answer that was easiest to reach in that room. I understand the performance of it. But you had 7 years of evidence in front of you, and when someone asked for the honest answer, those were the words you found. Her eyes were steady. I want you to understand why, not explain it to me. Understand it yourself. Because if you don't, the same words will be available the next time someone asks. He looked at his hands. The hands of a mill owner, not a mill worker. He had always known what they looked like and what that signified. He had simply never considered what else it signified. I reached for it, he said slowly, because I had stopped looking at you. I had been comfortable, and comfort made you invisible to me, not because you were small. He met her eyes. Because I was careless. Because I had arranged my life so that things worked and I did not examine how. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, there's something else. Something I was going to tell you that night. Before the letter. Before any of it. He waited. I'm expecting a child. The tea shop was very quiet. He absorbed this the way certain things have to be absorbed. Not all at once, but piece by piece, each piece rearranging the next. He thought about what she had been carrying toward that dining room, the letter in one hand. This news waiting to be said, going to show him, perhaps smiling, the way she'd been smiling in the kitchen. And then she heard what he said about her. Are you well, he said. The pregnancy. I'm well. Tired but well. She looked at him directly. I need you to hear me carefully. This child is not a reason to come back, and it is not a reason to stay separated. It is mine, and whatever I decide will be because it's right, not because it's expected or convenient. Do you understand? Yes, he said, without qualification. She studied him. Don't say it if you don't mean it. I mean it. Aunt Frederica arrived from Leeds 3 weeks later. Frederica Colmere, Rosamund's father's elder sister, 62 years old, possessed of the specific confidence of a woman who had managed everything in her life by her own judgment and attributed this entirely to superior discernment. Arrived with a solicitor and a firm intention to resolve the matter correctly. She came because someone ought to, and because she had decided that someone was her. Rosamund saw them from the schoolroom window, said continue your reading, without raising her voice, and went downstairs before they reached the door. Thaddeus found out about the arrival from Pip, who had watched from the window with the complete and unguarded attention of a child, who knew something important was happening, and had no intention of looking away. The tall woman, Pip reported, finding Thaddeus on the bench outside the school, talked for a long time. Mrs. Hale listened. Then Mrs. Hale said something, and the tall woman looked like she'd bitten into something she hadn't expected. He paused. The man with the case didn't say anything the whole time, just looked at the ground. Thaddeus went around the corner. He found Rosamund and Frederica seated on a stone bench, the solicitor standing at a careful distance, examining a building that did not require examination. Frederica looked up when he arrived and assessed him with the thoroughness of a woman who had been preparing her assessment since she received Rosamund's letter. Mr. Hale, she said. Mrs. Colmere. I came because my niece is 5 months along, living in a boarding house, and teaching other people's children while her own situation goes unaddressed. I came because someone ought to come. She looked at him steadily. And because in my experience, men of your particular kind do not correct themselves without the environment being arranged for it. What kind is that? He said. Competent, comfortable, and inattentive. She said it the way a physician named a condition, without malice but without softening. Not bad men, men who have never been required to look up. He sat down at the end of the bench. "She's right," he said to Rosamund. Rosamund looked at him. "She is. I'm not going to argue with an accurate description." He glanced at the solicitor. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm not here to manage the situation or take her back before she's ready. I'm here because she is carrying my child, and because she deserves better than I gave her, and the only way I know how to show that is to stay here and be different until she can see it." Frederica was quiet for a long moment. She had the same gray eyes as Rosamund. Once you noticed the resemblance, it was impossible to unsee. The same quality of looking at something and seeing the whole of it. "She was always the sharpest one," she said, not quite to him but in his direction, as if to ensure the information landed correctly. "Even as a girl, her father knew it, her mother knew it. Anyone who spent more than a morning with her knew it." She paused. "I was afraid when she married you, that she would make herself smaller to fit." "She didn't," Thaddeus said. "I just wasn't looking." The solicitor closed his case. On the day, Rosamund sat with Pip while he took the technical school examination. She had enrolled him through a combination of correspondence with the admissions secretary and a letter of recommendation from Mr. Finch that described the boy in terms so precise and so confident that declining him would have required explaining why. Thaddeus was at the mill in Bradford. He had returned 2 weeks earlier. Before he left Harrogate, he had sat across from Rosamund in Mrs. Craven's small breakfast room and written, in her presence, a letter to Mr. Hennessy. "Dear Mr. Hennessy, I write to confirm Hale & Sons' acceptance of the contract terms outlined in your correspondence with my wife, Mrs. Rosamund Hale, whose negotiations on our behalf were conducted with the full authority of this firm. I would note for the record that the terms secured are more favorable than any we have previously held, owing entirely to Mrs. Hale's diligence and expertise. She will serve as primary correspondent for this account going forward." He slid it across the table. She read it twice. When she looked up, something had shifted in her face, more open than the careful expressions she had worn through their recent conversations. "You didn't have to name me specifically," she said. "I wanted to." He held her gaze. "I spent 7 years not saying your name in the right rooms. I'm done with that." She looked at the letter once more. Then she folded it and handed it back. "Send it." He sent it. 6 weeks later, Rosamund came home. Not to the house as it had been, the house where accounts were managed in silence, and Thursday classes kept quiet, and a wife made herself invisible at the edge of everything, but to a house that had been, in the intervening weeks, quietly rearranged. Not physically. The furniture was the same. But Thaddeus had moved his correspondence files into the shared study, and he had set up a second writing desk across from his own. A proper one, with a good chair and a lamp angled correctly for evening work. He had not told her he was going to do it. He had simply done it. When she walked into the study on her first evening back and stood looking at the arrangement, he waited. "You moved your files," she said. It made more sense to work in the same room. She looked at the desk for a long moment. Then she sat down at it, opened her correspondence case, and began going through the letters that had accumulated. He sat at his own desk. The only sounds in the room were the fire and the occasional turn of paper. After a while, without looking up, she said, "Pip passed." "I know. You wrote to tell me." "He also wrote to me himself. He used 4 exclamation points, which I think was restrained for him." She turned a page. "He starts in January. Then he'll be building bridges by 30. She looked up at him. The desk lamp caught the gray of her eyes, which were, he had learned to see properly, not one color but many, gray and green and, in certain light, almost blue. He had lived across a dinner table from them for 7 years and had not known that. "Thaddeus," she said. "Yes. I want to show you something." She reached into the correspondence case and drew out a letter, not Hennessy's, not anything he recognized. The paper was thin and slightly worn, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. She set it between them. "This came while I was in Harrogate, from a woman named Dorcas Birch, no relation to Hennessy's partner. She was in my Thursday class 3 years ago. She learned to read at 36. She has just been made floor supervisor at the ribbon factory in Bingley." He picked it up and read it. 3 paragraphs, the handwriting careful and slightly unsteady, the grammar imperfect, and the feeling exact. "You gave me the words," the last line read. "I was always there, I just didn't have the words." He folded the letter and placed it back on the desk between them. "You have been giving people words," he said, "for a long time." "Yes. While I read the newspaper." She tilted her head slightly. "While you read the newspaper." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need you to teach me everything you know about the Hennessy account. The supply timelines, the grade specifications, all of it. I've been managing wool by instinct for 15 years, and apparently my wife understands it better than I do." The almost smile arrived, crooked and real, tilting slightly to the left. He had not known, until Harrogate, that this was the full version. The one she kept for things that actually struck her as funny. "I'll prepare notes," she said. "I would expect nothing less." The baby came in April, a girl, born in the early morning when the first light was still pale over the Bradford rooftops. Thaddeus did not leave the house. He had told the foreman 3 weeks prior that whatever happened in April, he was to be found immediately, and was not to be redirected for any reason, including the Hennessy delivery schedule or the opinions of Mr. Barnett. He was there for all of it. He sat on the edge of the bed afterward, with his daughter in his arms. Small and absolute in the way that new things are absolute, certain of their own existence before they know anything else, and looked at Rosamund. She was exhausted in a way he had never seen her exhausted. Not the composed management of tiredness she usually performed, the steady face she wore when things were difficult, but the real thing, the whole weight of it visible, and beneath the weight, something solid, something that recognized what she had just done, and was not afraid of it. "She has your coloring," Rosamund said. "She has your expression." He looked at the baby. "She looks like she's already forming an opinion about the situation." Rosamund laughed, the real version, unguarded and quick, and held out her arms. He transferred the baby with the care of a man who understood he was holding something that mattered more than the mill. More than the Hennessy contract. More than the sum of everything that bore his name in Bradford. Rosamund took her daughter, and looked at her with the complete and unhurried attention she gave to things that deserved it. "What do we name her?" he said. Rosamund was quiet for a moment. "Dorcas," she said. After Mrs. Birch, who learned to read at 36 and wrote that she was always there, she just didn't have the words. She paused. "And Frederica, because my aunt came all the way from Leeds with a solicitor, and that counts for something." "Dorcas Frederica Hale," he said. The baby made a sound of decisive and comprehensive opinion. "She's going to be extremely clear about what she wants," Rosamund said, not without satisfaction. "Of course she is," Thaddeus said. "She's yours." Rosamund turned and looked at him. The word yours sat between them. Not like a claim, but like a recognition. Something that had always been true and was only now being said correctly. He thought about a letter set face down on a hall table. He thought about 8 months of correspondence in his wife's handwriting. A contract secured in her name, £43, saved in coins, and small notes pressed into her hand by families she had helped without being asked. He thought about a boy named Pip who wanted to build bridges because Rosamund had taught him that mathematics was something you could walk across. He thought about a letter from a woman named Dorcas Birch, handwriting careful and unsteady. "I was always there. I just didn't have the words." He looked at his wife. At the gray-green eyes that were more than one color, at the face that had managed everything in his life, that mattered and been thanked for none of it. He looked at her the way he should have been looking for 7 years, with full attention. Nothing in the way. "I see you," he said. "Not a performance. Not an apology arranged to make things easier, a statement of the thing itself said plainly in a room with no audience." Rosamund looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to their daughter, and settled her more securely in her arms. "I know you do," she said quietly. "That's why I came home." Outside, Bradford was cold and bright and exactly what it was. Without ceremony, without softening, simply another April morning beginning. But in that room, in the pale early light coming through the window, something had finally taken the shape it was always meant to take. Not repaired. Not restored to what it was before. Made, actually made, for the first time, from what was true and what had been learned and what had cost them both, in different ways, more than either had anticipated. Some people wait a long time to be seen clearly. Rosamund Hale had done her waiting. She would not wait again. And the man beside her, who had learned to look at considerable cost, and not a moment before it nearly became too late, had made her one promise he understood completely how to keep. Not a feeling, not a declaration, but a daily choice. To look. To keep looking. To never again mistake what was irreplaceable for what was simply familiar.